Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask Mr Harfield about the probity audit that I think you said is going to the board next week.
Yes.
The report is going to the board next week. Just in terms of process, and I accept it's only going to the board next week, what would be the reporting, if anything, of the outcome of that probity audit would you expect? I guess I'm just looking for what confidence can we have coming out of that audit that what you've done to support current processes or ensure current processes are followed will be okay.
With mindful that this hasn't gone to the
Sure.
to the Airservices board yet for their endorsement and review, because we've been very mindful that particularly with the probity advisors and the probity auditors go direct to the Airservices board through there rather than directly through the management chain. I'm expecting that although that there will, and we've part of the terms of reference have been put into our submission, is that we've asked them to look for even further improvements that we can make if they can discover any. One of the areas that has come out is that in some of the complexities of the processes that we've actually put into place is actually creating a level of extra administrative workload that actually can create a non-compliance, because you sort of, if it gets too complex, something doesn't get followed rather than, and people are more worried or focused on the process rather than achieving the right outcomes of that particular process. But I'm expecting that they will support that the changes that we've made and that those controls are adequate for what we are doing.
Okay. As a follow-up question, Chair, to Mr Hehir, the stage 2 audit, the One Sky tender, which is underway at present, is stage 2 sort of mutually exclusive, or stage 2 and stage 1, are they mutually exclusive, or is there potential to be further review in that stage 2 of some of these stage 1 considerations?
The work that we're undertaking overlaps in time, but they are around separate topics. So the audit we're dealing with today was about the relationship
Sure.
between Airservices and ICCPM and the framework around that. Our second audit is about the One Sky procurement process. So they touch on each other, but they don't really cover the same ground, I think is the right way of describing it.
Okay, so until we hear further, mid next year, we should assume that they're mutually exclusive.
The audit will look at issues like the procurement process undertaken for One Sky and including the probity arrangements around it. So they have a similar topic area, but different substance of it. Yes. So if that by mutually exclusive, that's right. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Flint?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. In terms of, from Mr Harfield, in terms of the internal processes, I'm interested to know who was signing off, not individual names, but at what level of the organisation were these different contracts and procurement processes being authorised? So it says there were 42 engagements of ICCPM employees, 18 procurement processes, 6 contracts, 10 variations, etc., etc. So who was it? The same person signing off on these different things?
The financial delegate, or the ultimate approver for all of these, was the Chief Executive Officer.
Okay, right. Thank you. Separately, for Mr Hehir, do you think we have a broader policy problem or issue in terms of procurement rules? I mean, obviously departments are bound by a specific process, and the corporate Commonwealth entities are expected to implement and manage their own procurement policies and procedures. Do we have a broader policy issue?
Air Services isn't covered by the Commonwealth procurement
That's
rules.
right, yeah.
In our audit work on covering procurement, we haven't identified some fundamental flaw in the Commonwealth procurement rules. It's more adherence to them rather than the nature of them.
Sorry, I suppose, do we, and maybe it's an inappropriate question for you, but do we need to be imposing Commonwealth procurement style rules on other entities, or given the failures, it seems, in this instance?
I think that's a difficult question for me to answer.
No,
it's a
that's fair enough.
matter of policy, but
Yeah.
I think it'd be fair to say that the Commonwealth procurement rules do set out a robust framework for ensuring value for money and probity, and I think it's a fair expectation that entities would have, who aren't bound by the rules, would have something similar in place to deal with it.
Mr. Harfield, why did Airservices become the lead contractor, lead on this project? Given its significance particularly to defence airspace, why wouldn't Defence have become the lead agency on the contract? And if it had been, the Commonwealth procurement rules and framework would have applied. What was happening that allowed Airservices to become the lead and not Defence?
Can I just address that second part of your question? One of the areas, and this goes to the cultural aspect of the area that we're working on, is that because the thought is that because we don't have to comply with something meant that you could just toss it aside, rather than actually what do you draw out of that, and actually from the current Commonwealth procurement guidelines, and what do you accept as best practice. That is one thing that we're trying to change, because that was one of the attitudes that was around. If you don't have to comply with something, then you could just do whatever you want. And we've moved around to say that we should be adhering to things like the Commonwealth procurement guidelines and only deviating, because we can, where it is necessary to actually suit the organisation's needs. The other element that comes out in the audit report is that there was non-compliance with the procedures that were there. So regardless of what the framework would have been and what procedures, it wouldn't have been compliant. The reason that Airservices became the lead agency is that we are procuring a nationally harmonised air traffic management system. The air traffic management is that for Airservices, we cover and have a system that covers 11% of the Earth's surface and manages over 4 million air traffic movements, where Defence obviously have their bases and some airspace. The reason that it moved for Airservices to be the lead agency is our core business, where it's actually a support piece for Defence. And we actually have the expertise where probably the most integrated air traffic management system that is closest to the One Sky system is our current TATS system. And so we've got the expertise in implementing and managing that. So that was the reason why we became the lead agency. What that did was that it created a complexity of not only doing a once-in-a-generation procurement, but it also added that complexity of doing something on behalf of Defence, and then trying to make sure that all of our processes, whether through the tender evaluation, project delivery, all aligned between Defence's processes and Airservices processes. All the commerciality arrangements that come along with that, where we're a tax-paying entity, Defence isn't a taxpayer entity, etc., when we're actually the contracting authority with the successful tenderer, and we will pass through those assets to Defence. So to make things simpler in the longer run in a strategic relationship, it was felt that Airservices should be the lead agency.
So even though it was a very, very significant project, the project management capability in Airservices, which was obviously lacking. That's why these services had to be contracted.
Correct.
Obviously wasn't a key consideration in giving Airservices the lead agency role.
So, yeah, my understanding of how the decision went was based on the broader strategic factors of what was whose core business, etc., and then it was determined on what was the capability required to then execute, particularly around the tender evaluation, the acquisition stage. Implementation stage is that we've got really good form, and I would say second to none, because it's something we do every day, is swapping out the air traffic and keeping the air traffic control system running at the same time. But this upfront, and we needed to supplement that capability up front.
Okay, Mr. Holmes?